Welcome in here, everybody who's joining us just now. We're just getting started on a Patriots post-game show. That just happened. There's no hyperbole here. Everybody who watched it knows what happened. Patriots driving with a chance to tie or take the lead, doing everything right, working the clock to the point that they're either going to kick a field goal and have time expire or potentially take the lead. A great play there with Cam Newton gaining some yards, and then boom. Ball gets punched out, laying on the ground. Bills recover, ball game over. And without hyperbole, Evan, I think you can say season over, all on that one play. So a lot to take in if you're a Patriots fan here. So first, just react to what we just saw.
Just brutal. I mean, just a gut punch for the Patriots. Finally, I thought in that second half, the first half was exactly what we saw from this team the couple of weeks prior, right? Just sloppy execution, penalties setting them backwards offensively, suspect play calling, just giving up in situations, 3rd and 12 handoff, 3rd and 20 handoff, onside kick to start the half or whenever that, I think that was early second half. Just weird is I think the best way I would put it for a Bill Belichick coach team. And then finally they get back into a rhythm offensively. They're doing things that Cam is comfortable doing, play action from the gun, using him as a runner, moving the pocket, throwing comebacks on timing routes on the outside instead of the inside. All the things that we discussed all week long, it's all clicking. And then ball security, right? And turnovers. And that's something that they've talked about so much in these press conferences that were available to us. Bill Belichick harping, don't turn the ball over. Let's see what we can do offensively if we just play a clean game without any big penalties or without any big turnovers. They made it all the way down to the last play, basically, of the game before they turned it over. And just a gut-punching, now sort of season-altering loss, I would say, that everything sort of kind of looks different now from this point on just because of that one play.
Yeah, Evan, not going there yet. I'm going to quickly tweet out the link to people here and our followers, just in case you're watching or people to hear. But Evan, let's just keep talking about it. This was an interesting game in the sense that it did look and resemble in many ways the 49ers game, certainly for just how the Patriots defense got worked here. And we'll get into that a little bit better, but it feels weird to draw any moral victories off of a game because this isn't some team that you're, okay, it's the Patriots. You're supposed to win games. But I thought Cam Newton was considerably better, and the offense looked a great bit more functional, even, short their two, at least in name, best receivers.
Yeah, that was at least something positive. And I think when you can see from that second half, and I'll write a little bit about this, is just how they were able with play calling to get back to things that they are comfortable running and what the guys they have out there doing are, with those guys that they have, getting into 21 personnel with Damian Harris is a great call. Obviously, that's a situation where everybody feels comfortable. They feel comfortable running it. The back feels comfortable carrying with the full back in front of him, all that kind of stuff, a comfortable play call. Then once they started to get to the air, they did kind of get into more shotgun stuff. I've been talking a lot over the last couple of weeks about how much Cam Newton has struggled from under center play action, under center play calls, throwing the football. It just isn't his game. And so what they finally are able to do is when they do go under center, they're moving the pocket. It's bootleg action instead of it just being a stationary turn your back to the defense and throw. And then when they did want to get into more of a play action look, it was out of shotgun. And then they obviously got Cam involved as a ball carrier. It just everything that you saw, it just continuously is a positive from this offense in that second half. And I think if you punch it in there or if you get the game into overtime, we're discussing, hey, this offense looks okay. They finally woke up a little bit. The play calling is finally marrying to the personnel and making sense. And I think the biggest thing that really irks me, though, is that this game did not need to be this close if they had called the first half differently. If they weren't so damn conservative in the first half, if they weren't running the ball, on every single first and second down early and running the ball on third and long and second and long, and they're not punting in the opponent's territory on a 4th and 6 like they did, all of those things, or the end of the half situation where there's 12 seconds left and they decide to kick the field goal on third down instead of giving them a chance to convert a touchdown on third down and then kick it on fourth. those are the reasons that this game was as close as it was.
Well,
And I think that they did outplay the Bills in a lot of ways.
they did. This is going to come down to three obvious things. The Cam Newton fumble, which is what it is, and there's no escaping it. You can't do that in that situation, and that's the ball game right there. Number two, the run defense continues to be problematic, and they got absolutely gashed. And third, as you mentioned, coaching. And it's not just a play calling, it's a bit of everything. Again, that onside kick is extremely curious. The decision, I don't know what was going on that touchdown run with Allen when Bentley gets kicked to the outside and they leave the middle open. You've got the whole of Patriots Twitter, who are not football coaches, screaming, this is going to be a draw. It looks like a draw. So, I mean, there's a lot of situations here where it's, what are you doing? And then again, of course, the early down running a bunch of draws on 3rd and long, and I get it. You're surrendering a little bit there, and I think that there was fear of, letting the game get away from him there. So it's just cut your losses. But a very frustrating series of calls and decisions throughout this game.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the more frustrating part about the early down running was that we saw it in the first half not work, and then I'm watching, our EPA model here just kind of go up and up and up and up as they continue to throw the ball on early down. So they end up actually ending the game basically even in that category: early pass versus early rush. 27 plays to 26 plays. That's definitely what you need more out of is some of those early down play actions. They ran a couple of RPOs sprinkled in there on early downs. That's what you need. On the other side of the ball with the run defense, look, I think the biggest concern that you see there is the tackling, certainly. And the inability to set the edge is also a big one, because I think what ends up happening, and a lot of the things that Buffalo was running today was similar to what the Niners ran last week from a run game perspective, which is very heavy outside zone. And when you start running outside zone, you got to be able to set the edge, because what ends up happening is if you can't set the edge, then these runners are getting downhill extremely quickly. And as much as I want to say and sit here and blame Juwan Bentley, and he certainly missed a lot of tackles, and a lot of the DBs couldn't get off blocks and missed a lot of tackles, when those types of plays happen and the running back is gaining so much momentum before he even hits the hole and gets into the 2nd or 3rd level that he's moving full speed by the time he gets there, those become very difficult tackles for players in space at the NFL level to be able to wrap up and get a guy down one-on-one with that much room while he's coming at you full speed. That's where yards after contact happen. So the inability to penetrate on the line of scrimmage and set the edge to force those runners back in towards the middle of the defense, that was really my biggest concern with the run D on top of the tackling, which is an issue for the 2nd week in a row here. I don't know how much, the Bills didn't do a very good job stopping the run either. So I'm not sure if the circumstances, it was a little bit rainy, it was a little bit windy. Maybe it was just one of those types of games.
Yeah. And again, it's hard to say, obviously, on the field there. The wind was whipping a lot early, prior to the game. It looked like things died down a little bit. This problem with the run defense, one that's not going to be fixed. This is something they're going to have to live with all year. And in fact,
Right.
personnel just keeps dropping. You had Lawrence Guy leave the game. But Bentley, who has been far from solid this year, but he's about as good as you've got in terms of someone in the middle there who can make tackles. Wasn't having a great game anyway, and he left the game as well. So certainly some issues there. Again, there's a trickle-down effect when Gilmore's not in the game, though I thought the secondary acquitted itself fairly well today.
Yeah, the secondary played fine. Josh Allen actually, his production was pretty negative on the whole, and that interception, obviously, to J.C. Jackson's going to hurt it. I really do think, though, that this is sort of going to be the game plan against New England, because remember, as long as that offense is not high flying, and it's certainly not going to look high flying anytime soon for the Patriots, these other teams are not going to worry about the scoreboard, right? They're not going to worry about, we got to put up 35 to beat New England. You don't have to put 35 up to beat New England. You can beat them in the low 20s. So if you do rely a little bit more heavily on your running game, riding into this week, into this game, I talked about how the Bills pretty much didn't run the football. Right. And that's just crazy. They were one of the most aggressive 1st and 2nd down running teams, or throwing teams, in the entire league. Today, they actually ran the ball 28 times on 1st and 2nd down and only passed it 16, which is completely against their MO, completely against their typical way of going about things. So that tells you that Brian Daboll and the Bills coaching staff looked at this and they said, they can't stop us if we run the football. We knew they can't stop us if we run the football. So they went against their entire philosophy as an organization and leaned on their running game, specifically just because in this matchup, it's what was working.
Right, and that's the fear here is, everyone's seen the tape. I mean, it's a copycat league year to year, but also week to week. The Patriots are and have been exposed in this regard, and this is again something the teams are going to continue doing. And Patriots were cute and tried to outsmart teams early in the season to say, hey, I'm going to play these light, boxes. I'm going to dare you to run because that's what I want you to do. That's not working anymore because they're getting gashed for about 7 yards a take here. And that's just unsustainable. And we saw that today and we saw it last week. They tried desperately to put the ball in Josh Allen's hands and just weren't really able to all day long. We have to go back to Newton because, again, this is going to be the story. Prior to the game, Jay Glazer had a report which was somewhat interesting on the Fox pregame show that the Patriots are a little bit concerned of Newton's mistakes and that he's not necessarily on 1,000% solid footing, which is to say he can't keep going out and playing like he played in weeks prior. I think the consensus, and when you look at the tape and when you look at everything after, I think you'll get a feeling that he played an overall better game. But again, if mistakes is what you're worried about, you can't possibly make a larger mistake than he just made there. I don't know if that's enough to move the needle in one direction or the other, but just your feeling on the perception and the vibe around Cam Newton in Foxborough going forward after a game like this.
It's brutal because he really played his best game since contracting COVID. This was his best game since Seattle.
In Seattle.
Say. Really, yeah. I mean, the first half wasn't that good, but the second half, his ability to find Damiere Byrd on that over route across the middle of the field on their, I think it was their second or third touchdown drive, that was a really good throw. Muddy pocket, ability to kind of just throw with guys in his face. He didn't really have an opportunity to set his feet, and he was able to flick it out there right in front of Byrd with some anticipation. That was his best throw that I have seen him make since Seattle, which is a great sign, right? And then some of the running things that they did with Cam today were successful the way that we saw them be successful in week 1 against Miami. So all of these things are positives from Newton, but at the end of the day, the turnovers are what are killing this team. And if you go and you look, just go and do a search of how many the win percentage for a team, let's put it that way, a win percentage for the team when you lose the turnover battle. Now, the Patriots are 1-1 today. They didn't lose it. But when you turn the football over even just one time in a game, your win percentage absolutely takes a nosedive, right? And every team will tell you that if you turn over the ball more often than you take the ball away, you are going to lose a lot of games that way. And that's exactly what we're seeing. I think Cam is still the best player at that position for New England. He's clearly the most dynamic player at that position for New England in terms of what he can do as a playmaker and what he brings to the table. But if he doesn't stop turning the ball over, then it's going to continuously shoot themselves in the foot that way. At least he was better about no interceptions today. That fumble was the only turnover that he had. So he was really good for, 3.8 quarters or whatever it was, 3.9 quarters really. But it's a terrible kind of way to end it. And I feel for Cam because he played a much better game today. And then we kind of get into this situation where now we have to discuss, is Cam on the hot seat again because of the fumble?
And again, I think as we've covered during the week, the reason he's not on the hot seat is I don't think the belief is that their Stidham is going to be able to deliver much more in terms of what this offense needs, and you eliminate playmaking ability, which Cam possesses. And you saw it today. He was on the run. He was using his legs. And again, even late in the game, before that fumble, that was a positive play until it was the worst play of the game and possibly the entire season. But he was making plays. And again, those crossers that they were running, I don't know if that's because that's the receiver's best skill set with what they have with the remaining weapons, or just trying to keep everything in front of Cam a little bit. But it seemed like he had those whenever he wanted them.
Yeah, the crossers, I think, were a big part of just they're not going to be able to throw the ball down the field, right? So the only way that you're going to create big plays as an offense, if you can't stretch the field vertically, is to try to get horizontal stretch and move the offense side to side. I thought they did a nice job of doing that in terms of the second half, at least, being able to run crossing routes, being able to run things underneath the defense. The broadcast pointed out a bunch of times about how the Bills are walking 8, 9, 10 guys up to the line of scrimmage. And I take it as a great sign as well that Jacoby Myers in particular was able to continuously get open in the short and intermediate level of the defense, despite the fact that everybody in the entire world watching this game knew that he was going to get the ball in those areas of the field. Everybody knows he's going to run an over route. Everybody knows he's going to run short things underneath the defense. And yet they were still able to get him the football a couple of times. So, look, I get the frustration. The offense definitely didn't do its job at the end of the game. I didn't think the offense did its job before the end of the half either. And those types of situational execution type of things are often what win you and lose you football games at the NFL level. So it definitely was not perfect. And moving forward, I'm not really sure where they go from here, quite frankly, because the thing with me on defense is that I think they got to let the kids play. And Bill Belichick can go on the radio and say that they have more young players playing, positions, bigger roles than they've ever had. That's hogwash. Josh Uche finally got out there today. Anthony Jennings was MIA. Chase Winovich remains MIA. Kyle Duggar obviously was inactive for this game with an injury. Show me where the young players are and where they're contributing besides Damian Harris and Michael Onwenu. I don't see that. I don't see where they're getting that type of production. So to me, defensively, where you go from here is let the kids play, focusing on Josh Uche in particular. I've seen enough of Jawan Bentley. Let's get him off the field. Let's get somebody a little bit more athletic that can move a little bit more laterally and be a little bit more of an impact player, and see what they have with those types of guys. When they come back next week against the Jets, I am fully expecting a box of Josh Uche, Anthony Jennings, Adrian Phillips, Kyle Duggar. Those should be your off-ball linebackers moving forward. I've seen enough of Jawan Bentley to know that he's not the answer long-term there at inside linebacker.
And yeah, oh, sorry, Evan, I made you go away there. That was not my intention. We need you. Again, this isn't that team, and it's not the same comparison. I'm going to date myself here, but in year one of Drew Bledsoe back in 1993, that's the vibe you had at the end of the year. Obviously, you've got a franchise quarterback, but the kids start playing. They're playing late. They ran off 4 straight wins. You feel a little better about it. You are right. At a certain point, when you're not super worried about wins and losses, it makes sense to, give the ball to Damian Harris 20-something times. Throw the ball to N'Keal a ton and see what you have in him going forward when he comes back. Play the kids, put the tight ends out there. You have to see what these guys have, so you have something to build on next year, because at 2-5 with the Bills now at 6-2, right?
Yeah.
They played that extra game at 6-2. Division's gone. And really, and again, we talked about this leading up. You've got the Jets, great, and then you've got Baltimore and a very likely 3-6 start to this season, and then a need to run the table to have a shot at the playoffs. So you can almost say bye to the season. I don't think they're going to do it yet, but you would like to see somewhere in those last 4 or 5 games kind of empty the bench sort of scenario and see what they have. The bigger question, the more immediate one, is we've talked about it coming in, and it's going to be all we're talking about probably starting now up until Tuesday is the trade deadline and what to do here. And I think your stance is going to be the same, and I share this. If you get value, great, but you don't start giving things away for nothing. You're not going to make yourself much better giving away top shelf players for 3rd-round draft picks. But if somebody wants to give you a first or 2 seconds for Gilmore or overpay for Tooney, that's going to be better than the 3rd-round tender you'll probably get if you let him walk, I think you have to start considering these things.
Yeah, you're in a different mode now here. And I think the worst thing that you can do is sort of get caught up in the fact, okay, we're 2-6 through 8 games, but there's a second wild card, or 3rd wild card spot, I should say now. So there's 7 teams that make the playoffs. So a 7-9, 8-8 football team could technically sneak into the playoffs this year. That type of thinking is the worst thing that you can do, because even if you get into a wild card weekend, you're still probably going to lose that game, or maybe you squeak one win out of it somehow and you pull one off. This team is not going to the Super Bowl. They're not winning the Super Bowl. They're not going on a run. So the worst thing that you can do is get in the way of future rebuilding, future team building. And I think that in certain circumstances, if you know for a fact, and only Bill Belichick, I guess, could tell you this, but if you know for a fact at this point that Joe Thuney is a goner, that Stephon Gilmore is a goner, that some of their other veteran players who they might be able to sell off aren't a part of that future, then you need to start moving those pieces instantly, because only thing you're doing by holding on to them is hurting your chances of rebuilding. So I really would like to see the Patriots at least sell some things off at the deadline if they get good value. As you said, that's a perfect way of putting it. You don't just sell things just to sell things, right? You got to get good value for them. But I want to see Bill Belichick arm himself with draft capital, with salary cap space and flexibility, the whole war chest of assets to go after this next offseason, because clearly this team right now is not – they have multiple holes everywhere, and they're not ready to be competitive right now.
And I'm going to throw this in, even though it has nothing to do with the game, but it is an interesting tidbit. You have Bill Belichick very recently giving comments about salary cap constraints being a reason behind why the team lacks depth. And those lacks depth, sorry. And those comments were not received well by a lot of people because it sounds like excuse making. The salary cap is the salary cap. And sure, they currently have a large number because of all of the COVID opt-outs. So it is not necessarily representative of the challenges they were facing. They still failed this offseason regardless of their cap constraints. They did not address enough needs by a mile to make this a consistently dependable, competitive team.
Yeah, and well, I think the biggest thing to me is looking back on that draft, it's honestly, I get where they went with their picks. I thought safety, okay, it's not an immediate need, but you see long in the tooth for Devin McCourty. You just traded Deron Harmon. Patrick Chung is opting out and flirting with retirement every offseason now. So I saw the need at safety. Then they double dip at tight end. They double dip at linebacker. Okay, fine. All of that is fine. Going the 7 rounds of that draft without taking a single wide receiver is a detriment. That it's a mistake. There's no other way to put it, especially in a draft that was very, very deep at wide receiver, where you could have had some options there on day 3, early day 3, mid day 3, to pick up some guys that could contribute and could really, especially in this situation where you have everybody hurt, that they could get on the field and make some plays. I mean, it's just the negligence at the wide receiver position, and using that excuse of, well, we used a first on Harry and a second on Sanu, that's also hogwash. Listen, like, you got to throw assets at a position. You got to invest in a spot. You can't just take one receiver in the first round and say, problems fixed, right? You can't do that. So I can go back, and I'm not going to go back and play armchair GM and say they could have had this guy, they could have had that guy. My point just being is you could have had any guy in that point of the draft after you made your picks that you like the guys you like. You like Duggar, you like Uche, you like the tight ends, fine. Go ahead and take those guys. But then after that point, you should be investing in the wide receiver position. And the fact that they didn't take multiple wide receivers in last year's draft and the draft before that shows you why they have so many problems, because they're putting all their eggs in one basket. And that's really, it's painful.
And that's the thing is, I mean, look, they're not the only team that misses. Plenty of teams miss, and this happens. So it's an unknown. Okay, you can criticize the Harry pick all you want, and everybody has and will probably continue to. But again, you're right, is you have to recognize almost right away that didn't work. I don't know if this is the thing, so we got to keep going. We got to keep addressing it. And you don't want to play armchair GM, I will. Right before they pick their pick in round 1, you could go up one spot and take Justin Jefferson, who's
don't even get me started on that.
Looks exactly like the type of receiver that you want on your team, and it fits their offense as well. The type of player that he is. And if you didn't want to take Duggar, again, below that, there were other. Again, you could have stayed put. And Ayuk was there as well, and again, same school as Harry. And we've talked about this leading up to the week. A guy who does a lot of the things they thought maybe Harry was going to do later on in that draft in the second round. Instead of Duggar, you have Claypool, you have Chenault, you have other guys who are making impacts on competitive teams or teams that showing early that they're going to be able to be competitive in this league, where you don't really have that right now. You've got Damiere Byrd with his Damiere Byrd. You have Damiere Byrd, but again, you have Jacoby Myers with his 4.63, second slowest 40 in the combine 2 years ago, and Harry with his 4.59, not too far behind, obviously not playing here. you don't have the type of weapons that you need to be able to move the ball up and down the field. And
the weird thing is that Jacoby Myers is probably the best of the bunch right now.
By far. It's amazing.
He's
He's
a
not only
technician.
open, Evan, he's open by 15, 20. He's open by 5 yards every time Cam throws the ball.
If you could, the thing that's sad about it is that you can go and you can put Jacoby Myers in a productive offense, but if you are unable to put that hierarchy there, right? If you can't build with a number one guy or a number two guy and then a Jacoby Myers, you're just putting way too much on Jacoby Myers' plate. So I just went back and looked at the 2020 draft, and if you just look at the wide receivers that they could have had on day 3, guys like Devin Duvernay or Donovan Peoples-Jones, the list, Tyler Johnson, who's balling out with Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. That list is pretty long of guys that they could have just taken a flyer on. I love the offensive line depth, but let's look at the kicker in the 5th round. Let's look at Cash Malawia at linebacker in the 6th round. What are the point of those picks, right? When all these wide receivers are sitting there, you need wide receiver help. And again, it's a very difficult science, the draft. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know better than Bill Belichick about the draft, and nobody else should. But because it's a difficult science, you have to take multiple bites at the apple. You can't just take one swing with N'Keal Harry and say, well, we tried. We drafted a guy in the 1st round, and now we're done. So I think that's the biggest.
And you know what? They did it with Harris, okay? Harris is an example. You had Sony, and you're like, I'm not sure. I like this kid, so they took Damian Harris. I don't know if that was a need based off of what we saw today. It might be, because he might be a person who could be at least your early down back. We haven't seen, or he hasn't been given enough opportunity to catch the ball out of the backfield, but I don't think he's deficient in that area. I think he can play multiple downs on this team, and he could play more snaps and get more touches in general. But yeah, they haven't done it with receiver up and down. And the worst part is the people you do draft, you can't see the field. Again, Devin Asiasi was just left off, healthy scratch last week. He didn't travel with the team today because of a personal issue, and thoughts and prayers and everything goes out there. It sounds like there was a death to somebody close to him, but I don't know if he was playing one way or the other here. Dalton Keene was also inactive, as you mentioned, out. So you want to see this guy. You want to see if you hit something here. And again, we're not seeing it consistently enough. Hopefully, that's what happens here in the back half of the year.
Yeah, and I think what you'd like to see moving forward is, from what I understand, Bill has kind of taken an approach with the draft where he has his college scouting department and Nick Caserio and those guys basically handle the draft from the day that the last draft ends all the way up until the Patriots season ends, whenever that comes. And then at that point in time, he sort of takes over the draft process. He reads all their scouting reports. He sees their boards and how they have stacked players. And then what's happening, from what I've been told and others have been told, is that Bill gets hung up on guys. He gets really latched onto guys where he says, okay, Kyle Duggar, I love this kid. I saw him down at the Senior Bowl. He balled out down there. He's got great tape, even if it's at the D2 level. This is my guy. I'm taking him, right? And that's really what we've seen throughout the last couple of drafts, is that Bill, when they made the Georgia picks, for example, Isaiah Wynn and Sony Michel, what they sold us on that was, these are 2 players that have played in the college football playoff, the SEC championship. They've played their big-time schools, big-time programs, and big-time players in big-time games, right? That was what they sold us on. Okay, but what did those guys do on the field? What was their evaluation? What was their athletic profile? What was their future outlook? What position were they going to play? Where were they going to play in your scheme? It's got to be more. They said the same thing with Duke Dawson. Oh, well, he was at Florida in a great secondary with great people around him, and he knows how to play the game and all that kind of stuff. We can't have those guys anymore. They need guys that have talent. They need guys that have skill. And I think Isaiah Wynn was actually really probably the best out of the entire bunch. He's a pretty solid pick in actuality when you look back at it, but it's just that, coupled with the fact that this team can't seem to get them on the field and get them producing early on. Because you watch these guys, Uche is the first one that I've seen out of this draft class where he hasn't looked like the game is too big for him, and it hasn't looked like he's thinking too much out there. You draft a guy like a Duggar or an Uche or these rookie tight ends who are pretty good athletes that can run and can do some things, but they're thinking all the time. That's going to be a problem. That's going to be an issue. So I think that what we're going to see moving forward is it's not just about drafting. It's not just about player acquisition. they need to realize and refocus how they run their entire operation, because they're not going to have Tom Brady anymore. They're not going to have Julian Edelman anymore. Soon they probably won't have Devin McCourty anymore either. So this needs to be a younger team, and in turn they need to run the system differently because it's a younger team, right? And I think that's just the biggest thing, that most frustration that I have, is that they're still trying to do the same things that they were doing with Tom Brady,
Right.
and they were still trying to do the same things when they had the boogeyman last year, and they had a bunch of linebacker depth and a bunch of veteran players. And what happens? You watch Anfernee Jennings, you watch these guys, these younger players try to fill those shoes, and they're in cement because they're thinking too much and they have no idea where they're supposed to be going, or their responsibility changes, 2-3 different ways depending on the play call and depending on the way the offense moves and things like that. It's got to be dumbed down. It's got to be simplified for younger players, and they have to allow the talent on the team that they are drafting and they are developing to shine through over the scheme. And I think they've gotten too caught up in the minutia of the scheme lately, and that's, I think, an extremely frustrating thing to watch, because they knew that this was going to be sort of an overhaul. They knew that this was going to be a different quarterback. They knew that they were going to be implementing different pieces, and they've just until the second half today, it's been too complex.
Well, what's most amazing to me about this particular rookie class, and the fact that so many rookies have been slow to develop and see the field, is that if you are drafting guys that are Belichick type guys and guys who you think played in big time systems, all of the stuff that you just mentioned shouldn't be there. They should be more ready to play on day one than they will be stars 2 and 3 years down the road by that thinking. You're bringing in people who understand football and can contribute more quickly because they are more evolved. And that's the opposite of what we're getting here. You're bringing in people who may not have been that highly regarded to begin with and are also slow to pick it up. When you do that, why not take a shot at that top tier talent and you get him to figure it out when they get here? If your guys can't see the field because they're not getting it right now, that means you missed in 2 directions there. So again, it's easy to kill Bill. I don't want you to look at the chat here because there's a lot of people that want you to be general manager.
No, you don't want that. Although if I was general manager, in my defense, then Lamar Jackson would be the quarterback of the Patriots. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So that's the thing. We've talked about we talked about the coach, the players he wants to coach. He does have his guys who he looks at in the college ranks because he trusts their opinion.
And those coaching buddies, he gets them on the horn. He says, "All right, guys,
tell me about this kid."
Right? Tell me who your kid is? Right? Who's your star? Again, the trade down in the first round to draft a D2 safety, those days are over. You can't do that anymore. You just can't. You can't do it. And I just, that's the frustrating part to me, again, is that they did not change at all the way that they were going to build this team and the way that they were going to do things based off of the fact that they lost Tom Brady in the offseason. Yeah. They handled the draft and everything else the exact same way.
There's blood curdling rage on the chat board right now, and many people want their questions answered. And someone, Andrew, just said, "What's the point of the live stream if you want to answer questions?" So we will answer some questions here before we go, because this conversation we're having now, we're going to continue having without doubt, because again, the games may matter less as the weeks and weeks go on, and a lot of it is going to be about team building and what now. We're going to learn a lot about this team and its direction in a couple of days with the trade deadline coming on Tuesday. But for now, we'll just open it up. If anybody has any questions for Evan, by all means, just catch people up here. You saw the game. Patriots could have tied, could have won. Cam Newton dropped the ball a short while ago. Bill Belichick at the podium. I was watching that on the stream here. He endorsed Cam Newton for quarterback for the rest of the year unequivocally. So I don't think Bill wants to have this conversation. It's Cam, and here we go. And neither of us disagree with this move because he's really Evan, I lost you again, buddy. Evan will jump back in. We will take some questions. Andrew, I see you're saying thanks there, so we will take some of them. Why not start Stidham? Someone is asking because the season is over. Let me bring Evan back here. And someone's asking, why not start Stidham? We've talked about this, but why do you think not?
I don't think he's ready to play. I think what you see with Stidham is going to be way worse than what you're seeing with Cam. And secondly, Stidham doesn't do any of the things as a runner that Cam does. So you're just getting caught into a situation where you got a drop back quarterback with no weapons. I mean, I don't see how Stidham is going to fix any of these problems. It's certainly not going to be an answer. I don't think for this team. If you're going to put a quarterback like Jared Stidham in the game, you better have some playmakers around him because he's not individually a playmaker like Cam Newton is with his legs. So I just don't see how that fixes anything.
This is a good question here about culture, Evan. We talk about assets. Okay. What is interesting here is Bill giving up on the season is something we've never discussed here. Okay.
Yeah.
This is a conversation that goes on in every city, in every sport at this time of year because it makes sense. You give up on the year, the fan base is there, you're not going anywhere. You want something to happen. We've seen it. Both you and I are enormous Celtics fans. We've ridden along in tanky seasons with the promise of a new day and rooting for the kids, and that brings you joy. You're not worried about rings or championships here. You don't really have that with this team because there isn't a lot of up and coming right now. So the question is, what does this do to the culture here? Asked by Steven. If Bill throws the towel in, because you're doing this to people like Devin McCourty and again, James White, and people who have made sacrifices for you. They played this season with the threat of COVID hanging over them for you. You have other people considering whether or not to come back next year who you might need to bring back. And this is an important part of the conversation people aren't talking about. Do you lose Hightower? Do you lose Chung? Do you lose? I mean, Chung might retire anyway, even though he tweeted this week that he misses it. Do you lose everything you've built in a move like this? We've seen them trade people, but it was always one step back to take two steps forward. This would not be this scenario. This is a burn it down scenario.
I think it's tricky because it's not necessarily about tanking or about trying to get the number one pick or anything like that. I think you do need to approach the season a little bit differently moving forward in the fact that you are going to have to grow with the young players. You're going to have to let the young players make mistakes, right? And I think that's the biggest difference. It's not necessarily that you're going to try to purposely lose games or you're going to throw in the towel or anything like that. But moving forward, you have to see what you have with some of these pieces. So the options of Devin Asiasi when he gets out there on the field again, him just leaking out into the flat every single play, what is that really benefiting, really? So I think that's a thing that you got to look at is that you have to try to unlock some of these younger players, allow them to be sort of productive or sink or swim. And that's what you got to find out over the next 8 weeks. I don't think it's about tanking for the number one pick. I don't think it's about, a culture thing. I think it's mostly about you need to evaluate the current players on their roster, both rookies and experienced players, and say, who's going to be here with us in 2021? Yeah, who's going to be here with us beyond that? Because I think there's probably a pretty good chance that, for instance, Joe Tooney and Stephon Gilmore, and maybe the McCourty twins, maybe some of these older players that are going to start retiring, all of those guys are not necessarily part of the future. So let's see some of the younger guys play. I'm not saying take Devin McCourty off the field for Kyle Duggar, but let Kyle Duggar play over, let's say, an Adrian Phillips a little bit more, because Adrian Phillips is a one-year deal free agent signing who's been nice, but he's a nice player on a Tom Brady Patriot team, not a nice player on this version, a 2-6 Patriot team.
Yeah. All right, we'll ask Leon here. Kamitsis, sounds like an Elena. What's up, Leon? Sounds like a Greek. Wants to know why Bill has such a tough time drafting wide receiver. And again, we've talked about drafting in general, about having guys that he likes, having people who speak well of those types of people, looking for certain traits that maybe other people aren't as focused in on. And then, as you mentioned, locking in on his guys. But why particularly wide receiver?
To me, honestly, I think the reason why they've struggled at wide receiver is because they haven't really tried to draft wide receiver. If you just try to hit one guy at a time, I don't know what you expect is going to come from that, right? If you just try to invest 1 year at a time, every couple of years you sprinkle in a wide receiver pick, it's obviously not going to work out for you. I just don't see how the investment in the position is my biggest issue. Now, the second thing in terms of evaluation and what actually they're evaluating incorrectly. I think that what they're missing mostly with the skill players is guys that are actually going to have their athleticism and their explosiveness and their speed translate from college to the NFL. So at the college level with N'Keal Harry, he looks like a much faster player. Then all of a sudden, when you get to the NFL level, well, you can't reverse field at the NFL level anymore. You can't weave in and out of 8 guys
and
on a screen pass and take it 80 yards to the house. That's nothing.
The play that everybody saw on the draft tape when he takes it all the way across the field there, and everyone's like, ooh, and then you haven't seen anything close. How many times they run him on a jet sweep and he gets caught in the backfield or just for a 2-yard gain on the edge, and you're like, wow, he didn't run away from everybody. And they stopped doing that. He didn't have that game speed in the NFL.
Right. So I think that's the biggest thing. You look at a team like Pittsburgh, and everybody's always like, how does Pittsburgh get all these wide receivers? I don't get it, right? You look at a team like Pittsburgh, the first thing that they prioritize, number one on their list, is translatable explosiveness. Is this guy's athleticism real? Is he really a good athlete at any level of football, not just in college, but in the pros? Is he going to translate as a good athlete? And that's why you get the difference between N'Keal Harry and Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool was a combine standout. He was a combine hero. He ran in the 4.4s. He jumped out of the gym. He did everything he possibly could have done. And then you turn on the tape at Notre Dame and you see that speed, size translate in a way down the field that it never did for N'Keal Harry at the college level. And it's just a entirely different evaluation process. So I think way too much is being put on character, way too much is being put on, okay, here are a couple of skill sets that he has, a couple of things that we could do, that we do, that he can do, yak, things like that, ball carrying. That's nice, right? That's good. But unfortunately, at the NFL level, to be an effective ball carrier after the catch, you have to get open and catch the ball first to even get into that point, into that phase of the game. So that's the biggest thing, I think, is looking back on their kind of misses at wide receiver in the past. It's been they've drafted good athletes, but not elite athletes. And it's not just athleticism, but you need to start to look for the fuller picture.
All right. One other thing I'm going to talk here. We've got Mike over on YouTube. Any other city, Bill would be on the hot seat. Now, we know that's not the case here in New England. I will pose one question to you, though, Evan. You can't erase a track record of 20 years of not just miles ahead of his peers in-game decision-making, but also team building. And again, that's also with Tom Brady, which covers up a ton of flaws, and we've seen that over the years with some of those teams, but it still doesn't matter. Belichick has been able to find players all over the place. He's a great second drafter also with a lot of teams. Bringing in guys who were drafted with a high pedigree and other teams didn't work out, bringing them in, getting the most out of them here. How many people have left New England and gone on to sign massive deals elsewhere after they were finally put in a position to succeed because their previous home couldn't do that for them. So there are plenty of things he does well in evaluating talent, but after the run that he's had and the situation they're in, if Bill Belichick were two separate people, Evan, the GM might be under the hot seat. Bill Belichick as a whole won't be and isn't because of everything he's done. And you're not bringing somebody in to do a better job, but there does beg the question on whether Bill's able to recognize it, whether at some point Robert has a difficult conversation with him and says, Bill, what do you think we bring in somebody else here on personnel stuff to maybe help out? You don't know how that's going to land. You could have a Bill Parcells, Bobby Greer 2.0.
Supposed to do that as Nick Caserio.
Caserio is, but what's evident here is Caserio, while he might have a lot of skill at evaluating talent, for whatever reason right now, it doesn't appear that somebody has that voice in Foxborough that is able to, you're not going to overrule Bill, but able to move him off his spot. And that doesn't seem to be the case right now.
I think that's the biggest thing. And you mentioned also like guys that they've signed that have gone on to cash in, like a Trent Brown or something like that. I also do want to point out that a lot of their players that they draft get poached. But the problem is that strategy, you can do that, right? You can let Trey Flowers walk. You can let these players that they develop in-house that then go on to get huge contracts. Malcolm Butler, Trey Flowers, Chandler Jones, trading him. We can go right down the list, as long as you can replace those players in the draft. But when you don't replace those players, that's what we're seeing out of recently with the Patriots, is that they let a Trey Flowers walk Where's the replacement? There isn't one. They let Kyle Van Noy walk. Where's the replacement? There isn't one. And on the offensive side of the ball, Gronkowski retires. Where's the replacement? They draft 2 guys in the 3rd round this year that have done absolutely nothing. So that's the problem, is when you keep on doing that, right, then you you put yourself in a position where you need to cash in on your draft picks. And if you don't cash in on those draft picks, then here we are. Then your roster is talentless. Not talentless, but you know what I'm trying to say. So I think the biggest thing, though, in terms of Belichick being on the hot seat, it's not so much that. They definitely just need to get somebody like a Nick Caserio. Needs to have a little bit of more of a backbone, I would say, with Belichick, and say, hey, listen, we've been watching these guys since last May. We've been talking to scouts. We've been talking to coaches. We've been boots on the ground in some situations, going out and scouting these guys. You might like Kyle Duggar, Bill, but I'm telling you right now that the better football player is going to be Kenneth Murray, who went 23, the pick the Patriots traded out of. Or if we traded up 1 spot, draft Justin Jefferson, or 2 spots, I guess, to leapfrog Minnesota, he was going to be the better player. That's what we need. We need somebody that has a little bit of a backbone, a little bit of an ability to stand up to Bill, because right now he definitely gets all of it, right? He gets all of the say in that draft room. And so far in the last couple of years, it hasn't really panned out the way that it did in the beginning part of the dynasty. And now I think he needs to sort of evaluate that and realize he's always so good. And this is what becomes so frustrating for me, because he's always so good at identifying mistakes and realizing when they're not being good at something and how to fix it, and understanding when a player like a N'Keal Harry isn't panning out. They don't just put all their eggs in that one basket, right? They move on and they find another option, and they keep working the problem. This time, it's just they're not doing any of those things.
Yeah. I guess well said, Evan. I don't know how much we can add here, but they're not. And again, this is going to be the conversation. Again, we're going. No, HRJR, don't go anywhere yet.
Yeah, come on. You can't bash us the whole stream and then back out.
You're just bashing me. I don't care. Evan, you're the man. That's the consensus here. We're gonna like I said, this conversation is gonna go on and on. As far as this game goes, we're gonna put a bow on it again and reset the stage here. This is where we are. The Patriots, and again, you're here, you watched it, so I don't want to necessarily have to relive all of it, but they lose a game that they absolutely had to win. They fall to 2-5. The Bills are 6-2. Cam Newton, crucial fumble. We haven't heard from Cam yet. I keep checking in to see when he's going to talk, but look, he's been long for everything, and he'll continue, and I'm sure in his game commentary, and again, I haven't seen, has he taken the mic yet?
He has not, as far as I know.
I haven't seen it yet.
He'll be about another 20 minutes or so.
We're monitoring that. Evan, I'm going to let you jump in on that so you can take a listen, and we'll jump in again after. He's going to take the blame, and that's that. I hate to put this all on Cam, but
yeah.
But again, what's amazing here is, as damaged as this team is, if Cam makes 2 different individual plays in 2 different late game situations, which is funny because he runs in a touchdown today by bouncing it outside. I don't know if the formation was the same as Seattle in that one, Evan, or not, but it made me think, one decision to bounce outside against Seattle and then holding onto the ball here, and this could be a completely different situation, a completely different season. You could be 4-3. Seattle felt like a moral victory because you didn't think it would be. Lost Evan again. We'll get Evan back. Seattle felt like a moral victory because it didn't feel like the Patriots were going to be in this bad a situation, and welcoming Evan back. But talking about Seattle, you didn't think they'd be here, Evan. And so you felt good about that game, but now you look back on it like, like old Patriots teams, you could lose one you should have won and be like, what does it matter? I'll see you in the AFC Championship game anyway. But now all of these count, and you're going to be looking at individual moments and plays, and both of them are owned by Cam Newton at this point. I mean, I'm not going to put COVID on him, but I mean, the game he loses was a win. The game they lost against KC was probably winnable if he plays an average game. That's not on him, but the 2 other games, again, if Cam Newton makes different plays, they could be in a totally different situation right here. So just something for perspective as we talk about the situation that they're in right now. As bad as they've been, a break or 2, they could be 4-3 or better. And you're talking about ways to salvage this year.
The way to salvage this year is, as much as it pains me to say, the way to salvage this year is to get some positive play out of their younger players, right? If we can come away from this season, even if they're 6-10, 7-9, or whatever they end up being, and you can say, okay, well, yeah, they didn't have a good record, they didn't make the playoffs, but at least we saw something out of Kyle Duggar, at least we saw something out of Josh Uche, at least we saw something out of Devin Asiasi. Then you can come away with this and say, okay, they got some pieces here, right? They got some building block pieces that they can move on and move forward with. And your point about Cam, a couple of different plays there that could have flipped the entire season, really. I think that shows you, to me specifically, that's how thin their margin of error is right now. Is that one little play here, one little play there, those are the difference in these games 9 times out of 10. And I think what you saw in the Brady years is that if you go back through the Brady years, a lot of these types of situations, right, before the half situations or end of the game situations, that's usually their bread and butter. That's when they execute the best. And so many of these football games across the board, you can go watch the entire slate of games today. So many of them are decided by 1 or 2 little plays and situational football. 2-minute drills, 30 seconds left in the game. You have 1 timeout. You need to go 30 yards. Can you gain the 30 yards? And when you have a team that's struggling to put together consistent play and string together consistent execution, those plays just they weigh on you, and they just become harder and harder and harder to execute. And that's what we're seeing with this team. Every 5-yard penalty, every illegal hands to the face penalty that they had today. I think they had 5 or 6 offensive penalties. This team can't overcome those types of pre-snap penalties. That's what you're seeing time and time again, is that they just continue to shoot themselves in the foot, and they don't have the talent to overcome that.
Nope. And that's where we are, 2-5. Jets next week. You're going to feel okay about that one. Baltimore the week after. That's going to be scary.
Right.
But that's where we are. We're waiting to hear on Cam. Evan, I'm going to let you go. Everybody here on the stream, thank you for joining us and hanging in. I know there's a lot of people out there definitely frustrated by this one. This was a real gut punch. This game was trending in a different direction late, and just that was it. Just
Absolutely.
dropped it on the ground. So we'll wrap it up. Subscribe here for our post-game videos and all of our Patriots stuff and all of Evan's content on our Patriots YouTube page. So please subscribe there. You get alerts when we go live like this, which we'll be doing quite a bit. We'll do it again for the trade deadline and see what happens there as well. That's going to be a crazy day, obviously, election day as well. So I don't know how many people are going to be super concerned with the trades, but I'd imagine quite a few, actually. And follow us on CLNS Media. We'll wrap it up. Take care, guys.